Good afternoon. It's Friday the 20th of December 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and we've also got, we've got Alex Thomson, we've got David Ellis, and we've got Brian Gerrish with us via video link for the last UK Column News of 2019. And so we're going to do a bit of a review of the year, Patrick, and we're going to start with global uprising.
Yes, well, there's a lot of stories that we could talk about this year, Mike. There's a lot of big stories. Certainly Brexit is the most dominating story in this country, maybe in Europe, maybe even further afield. But in America, we had the collapse of the Mueller report. We have the impeachment of Donald Trump. Russiagate dies and Ukrainegate is born. We have the incarceration of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange this year. There's a lot of big stories between Britain and the United States, no shortage of them. We've covered all of them on this show. But I think globally, one of the things that we just can't ignore, Mike, is what you might call the global uprising. And there's just a number of countries, it seems like, at least in the last 6 months, one after another. We'll just run through some of the things that are going on around the planet. There's a whole block of countries here in South America, starting with Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, but also Ecuador and Argentina. And there are other protests besides these, by the way. I'm just picking out the main ones. And then around the world, of course, in Europe, we have the Yellow Vest movement in France that has just gone completely from strength to strength from late last year and late sort of 2018 and still going strong as we speak right now. But also we have major upheavals in countries like Haiti, and also in countries like Sudan, India, and Egypt as well. India has just flared up in the last week over various issues. But then across in Asia, we have Hong Kong. This is a major visible protest that we see internationally. Lebanon is absolutely have a major upheaval right now politically and socially in Lebanon. Iraq, major protests in Iraq. And of course, Catalonia in Europe. This has been a major upheaval in the EU itself. And we have Italy and a number of other countries too. You covered the farmers' protest in the Netherlands recently, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So what are we looking at here? Are we looking at a global uprising? Are these connected? This is the question a lot of analysts are trying to answer, and it's not quite that simple. It's not quite that simple. If we go back to this chart here, and we see there's a few, I'll drop a few American flags here, Mike, in terms of the U.S. co-opting some of these so-called opposition movements, Hong Kong and Iraq. Certainly there's evidence of this, and in Bolivia as well. Now there's a counter-protest going on with the new, let's say, U.S. installed government in Bolivia. So, are they connected? Some of them are, but I think more often than not, we see real movements co-opted by the establishment. And you could probably say, if you're very cynical, Mike, and you're very conspiratorial, you'd say the ones that aren't being co-opted are absolute grassroots protests and movements. I think a good example of that is the Yellow Vest Gilets Jaunes movement in France. Does not seem to be at all in any way, shape, or form co-opted by the establishment. It's been over a year since these protests have been going on in France. So that's an indication that you might be looking at a grassroots protest, a grassroots movement there. But certainly there's a number of geopolitical hotspots that the U.S. has made no secret that they would like to steer and covet, Hong Kong being one of them, and of course overthrowing the current government in Iraq and pulling that country away from Iran in terms of its diplomatic and geopolitical sphere of influence. That's a major goal overtly stated by the U.S. State Department, by numerous U.S. officials. So that's likely what's going on in those countries. So, but the other thing is you can't ignore the fact there's a genuine distrust in the authoritarian governments, in governments in general, in authority in general. I think this is a trend. This is undeniable. What we're seeing now, there is to some degree, it's amplified and it's driven by social media. because people see each other around the world, they get inspired by each other, they see what's possible, how to build a movement. But I don't think it's so much a singular movement, Mike. I think it's also, I say even the left wing, right wing, whatever the protests are, this is also nationalism, the concept of nationalism re-emerging after the 20th century and the post-World War II period being very much about multilateralism.
So is this an anti-globalist thing then?
It's not.
Or is that too simple?
It's functioning as an anti-globalist thing because nationalism is also anti-neoliberalism. Because if you think about what neoliberal economics has done to a number of countries in societies, it's an international effort. It's a banker-driven effort from New York and from Europe. But that's also neo-colonialism. So I think you're seeing all of these factors, I think, are feeding in to what we're seeing in this quote-unquote global uprising. Of course, it's horses for courses. Not all protests are the same, and they are started for different reasons. Some are co-opted and some are not so far. But it's undeniable that you're seeing people really scratching their heads and saying, what about the world order of the last 70 years? Does it really work for us in the 21st century? This is genuinely what a lot of people, I think, are expressing.
Okay, well, let me welcome Alex Thomson to the program. Alex, I'd just be interested to get some brief thoughts from you on this.
I think that Pat has laid the groundwork there tremendously well, Mike. Absolutely, what we have to look at is not the origin of these movements on various continents, but the way in which they are steered and reported or otherwise. And it was very signally important that Pat began with Latin America, where perhaps the most dramatic, together with perhaps countries like Lebanon, but mostly Latin America, the most dramatic uprisings and discontent are being voiced at this time and most deliberately ignored or misreported abroad. Now, I think it was very telling that Andrei Vilcek, when he gave an interview to Pat a few weeks ago on 21st Century Wire on the Sunday Wire, said that Latin America had this unfortunate tradition of winner takes all, that whether it's the nationalist stroke fascist light type of government or the communist light international revolutionary sentiment that takes hold in a particular Latin American republic, that they then stuff the entire government and public service with their people and proclaim a complete cultural victory. And that is what Latin America now, with some foreign help, particularly Russian and Chinese, is attempting to surmount. But that is the situation in which a lot of other countries, including in Europe now, are being faced. And in my section in a moment, I'll try to perhaps outline that. We're being forced into this left-right paradigm that absolutely no longer meets the order of the day. And I would perhaps tentatively add even the nation of Israel, nation, not state, to those flashpoints that Pat has outlined. All of us at UK Column, we have different angles of interest here, but we all follow domestic social developments within Israel with particular note. And that country too, even though its state pulls strings abroad and orders America, Britain and France around in many ways, it's undeniable now at the end of this decade, it itself is facing the same kind of issue. What kind of nation are we going to be? This cannot be cast into a left-right mold anymore.
Yeah, very, very good observations by Alex.
Brian, have you got any thoughts?
Well, what came into my mind, Mike, was some time ago, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the names of the two young gentlemen, but we had two guys who came and did an audio interview with us talking about what was happening in Colombia. And what was of interest is that they were describing immense changes happening in some of the indigenous tribes. And those changes were being driven by very sophisticated techniques, which we're seeing are being used to drive change in the UK. So you had teams of very smart, highly educated people coming in and talking, for example, to local women about women's rights, and this was then used to put leverage to break apart some of the community cohesion in Colombia. But the techniques, the manner that they did it, this can be seen operating in Western Europe. And then we have to ask a question: is it the same hand driving what we're seeing in Europe, in UK even, with what's happening in very remote places in Colombia? My instinct and the research that I've certainly done says, yes, we can see that there is such an extraordinary similarity, it has got to be coming from the same source. And perhaps just to be a bit provocative at the end of the year, we should then say, when we see a gentleman like George Soros boasting that he's able to use billions of dollars to influence social change and indeed uprising, those dollars are not being spent on projects which don't work.
Yeah, absolutely. The NGO factor that Brian's referring to, it's absolutely prevalent. This is decades in the making, and but we're seeing pushback against it in some countries as well.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, we need to move on to Alex's choice for the year, Alex. Then, and really coming back to the UK and how the UK is governed. And Alex, you're initially talking about the Wreckers moving in 2010 to change our constitution and the way we're governed. But of course, perhaps this is a little bit unfair because this process really began with Tony Blair, didn't it?
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to suggest it myself, Mike, but 1997 with the new Labour government, which lasted 13 years. And I very much remember as a Cambridge undergraduate listening to radio programmes, walking down the backs of the colleges about the radicalism and thinking, OK, we're in for a whole generation now of wrecking, and we got it. But that was above water. Blair and his cronies came in, described by people both right and left, dissidents against him. Peter Hitchens is one example, many others. That was above water. They were saying, we are going to wreck the Constitution, away with the role of Lord Chancellor. They even tried that. Let's have a federal United Kingdom. Let's have human rights. Let's have a pseudo-republic. At some point, that project ran out of steam. But we thought that we had escaped the worst in 2010, when, for those watching abroad might not know how unusual this is for Britain, we suddenly had a coalition government between David Cameron and Nick Clegg, and their subsequent careers, Mr. Clegg with Facebook and Mr. Cameron, well, I know not what, but basically going back to representing hedge funds, which is where his family comes from anyway. These gentlemen posed as centre ground conservatives, having gone to very spiffing public schools. And here they are as the Chuckle Brothers in 2010, standing in the Rose Garden, our Americanized commentariat called the little patch of ground outside the Cabinet Office, the Rose Garden. And here they are saying, we're going to have a coalition, we're going to go European. And thanks to Brian, above all, we know that Common Purpose's own Julia Middleton had said before the 2010 election there was going to be a coalition, because otherwise people with sufficient guile could not be put into government. So there's a first hint, several years after 2010, of us piecing together what happened, that we were going to get a decade of subtle constitutional wrecking. Well, the Supreme Court had just come in 2009. It had opened its doors, and as the decade progressed, we saw what kind of institution that was. The whole public service at this point, I think even more than today, because Brian and others had not yet managed to ramp up the reporting on it, was completely riddled with common purpose. And so I'm building up towards an analysis where I say that basically we were facing, shall we say, pseudo left-wing plotters in pseudo right-wing clothing in 2010, and I would perhaps suggest the situation's now reversed. We're going to get an era of bogus patriotism and bogus centre-right government, with some pretty socialistic and totalitarian things coming in through the back door. What was going on in 2010, a decade ago? Well, the free media was in its infancy. We basically only had blogs. And we were only dimly aware in the middle part of the country, as it were, that there were very many abuses going on in our court system, that human lives were basically being bought and sold, particularly the old and the young and the infirm. That, I think, is, that scattered position we had in 2010 has come on a long way now. So here we are on the threshold of the 2020s. And here we have a situation of complete polarization. I think that, again, the Sunday Wire has brought this out as well, because it gives a particular voice to, shall we say, that the decent Labour voting part of the country. I have a great deal of sympathy with them. They feel completely crestfallen now. And they're quite right to fear that in this age of an absolute Tory majority, we're going to get, under the banner of all is well, up with Middle England, we are going to get an increase in deaths, suspicious deaths of the infirm and the disabled, of totalitarian abuses under cover of conservatism, such as much more clamping down on free speech and free preaching in public. And we now have a juristocracy. the Supreme Court, embodied here by Lady Hale with her wonderful spider brooch, giving the verdict on supposedly contempt of Parliament and lying to the Crown, having been done by the Prime Minister for proroguing Parliament. This embodies in one image really the situation we have got into with a constitutional mess of the First Order. And that middle point there, I have faux patriotism kicking out common purpose. Well, we're going to get on, I think, to Dominic Cummings later, but basically what we're going to see in the 2020s, at least in the first half of it, is under a Conservative government, which seems secure for a while now. We are going to nominally leave the EU. There's going to be some kind of bonfire of the common purpose types and of the old guard of the civil service, the supercilious generalists. That may actually usher in an era of better, tighter planning in government, with more regard for the nation's well-being in terms of infrastructure and actually accountable government, possibly. But under the surface, these problems are going on. And the last bullet points I've put on there is that the free media is now mature. I mean, a format like this, and the experience the five of us have gleaned and the others working with us, is pretty, you couldn't have imagined it in 2010 or even 2015 that we had amassed this followership and this stock of shared knowledge, but it's being suppressed. It's being, and every time Pat gives a special talk, he majors on this quite rightly, that the media and the control mechanisms for the media go straight to the deep state. So we end up with a situation that, on the dawn of the 2020s where we have constitutional knowledge that is now widespread. And, last night, for example, even on the millennial stream, with two kinds of nationalists involved, Millennial Woes is an ethnic nationalist, and Count Dankula, a very civic nationalist who doesn't talk about ethnic issues at all, they were actually saying we're going to have an era of constitutional rehashing ahead of us. So here we have my predictions for the 2030 timeframe: geographical and social fragmentation. The left-hand image I've put up there is some wag saying, look, the Remain voting parts of England in particular, the M4 corridor and certain Midlands and northern outliers of relative wealth, and down the south coast, these overlap very tightly with where people have pret-a-manger branches. Pret-a-manger being a rather pretentious sandwich shop, also favoured by Extinction Rebellion protesters. The point there is not to attack a chain, but to say you have different societies now developing geographically, and even within a single city, cheek by jowl, in different zones of the city, with living different kinds of lives, different employment patterns, and consuming different media to get different truths. And the right-hand image shows, of course, that Scotland and Northern Ireland have voted extremely differently, more differently than ever before, to their own past, let alone to how England and Wales are voting. So keeping the United Kingdom together is going to be an absolutely, the odds are stacked massively against us for the 2020s. So my prediction is by 2030, because the British tend to do these things in a low-key way without being so upfront about it, Scotland will be de facto independent against the wishes of the majority of Scots who are not Scottish nationalist or SNP voters by any means. Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic will be de facto governed even more closely together than they are at the moment, without any formal declaration. My other prediction is Wales, which tends to be the latecomer to any social movement, but really gets on fire when it takes to it. Wales is going to be the last of the home nations that really understands common law and implements it at a popular level, whereas England is going to go half awake, I think, and half globalist, particularly with the immigration streams continuing to come in. And my more concrete prediction is that by 2030, we will have had a constitutional convention. Now, we at UK Column British Constitution Group will be very much against that, but it's a fait accompli, I think. We're going to have one of these constitutional conventions, much as we don't like it. And our job is going to go beyond endorsing candidates and party politics, and actually try to educate the people in what the common law represents, so that we don't lose the safeguards we already have. Just grand juries, to take one of them. If you codify a constitution, that route is no longer there. So we've got to avoid panels being stuffed. The free media will go underground. Perhaps printing and standing on soapboxes will be the way forward. But that's our mammoth task for the 2020s, is to educate the people, and really to replicate the 1780s, to bring about a federalist paper situation where the enlightened constitutionalists of the nation speak to the Middle England voters in particular and say, do not wreck the Constitution.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Alex. That was superb. David Ellis, let me bring you onto the programme and say hello. What are your thoughts on what Alex has just presented?
Yeah, a lot of that makes real sort of sense to me, as to how that's sort of all filtering out there. And I think over and over again we see this. Whilst they say we're going to do this way, it could be either Labour or Conservative. Actually, it doesn't seem to make any difference either way. There's only a margin for how quickly it's done or how open or subtly it's done. But no matter what, the policy still continues, and that's our biggest hurdle. Really, is that the representation that we think we've got in Parliament with MPs primarily represent the party, not the people. That's our first hurdle. But moreover, I think we've got to get to in this education of our constitution. Now, the other thing we've got to do in tandem with it is, where is the policy coming from, and why aren't our MPs doing what we want them to do rather than what they're told to do from party command? So there's the sort of two aspects. But I think that it's ironic there that, Alex, that you said about the Scotland and Northern Ireland and Britain, because that's pretty much how I see it.
Absolutely. The single market in Ireland is already pretty much established. I think the only thing that, Patrick, the only thing that's sort of slowing that process down at the moment is that Dublin, frankly, at this point, still can't really afford the 6 counties. If the EU was to wade in with some additional money at some point in the not too distant future, then that situation may change very quickly. Alex, I just want to come back to you on one thing, and just a yes or a no answer. Do you think that that the vote in the general election in Northern Ireland, where we've seen a majority of nationalist seats for the first time, do you think that was part of the general Brexit protest vote, or is that something that is going to continue?
It's not part of the general Brexit scene, because except in a couple of city centres, you will not find people in Scotland raving on about the benefits of EU membership. A few very remote places in the Highlands and Islands think that they can't survive without the EU. But no, the increased SNP vote is a direct corollary of the EU, not non-EU, but the EU migration to the new middle-class jobs that are being created in the better parts of the more wealthier parts of Scotland, and a corollary of the youth indoctrination by the SNP. It's still only a third, or at most 40% of Scotland's population, but it's a fanatical unified bloc, and so it presents a united face to the outside world.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Right, David Ellis, your subject for the year, of course, is defence and defence union. How do you see that policy having progressed through the year, and what's going to happen in the coming months?
Well, it's progressed rapidly, of course, and we've had the revelation from Ben Wallace that the government has gone in voluntarily, and the pushback line there is that there's it's not a problem. We've still got command and control, and we volunteered in. Well, of course, that's the strap line that they're politically going to try and bat everyone away with. But of course, what they've not done is look at any of the risks. Obviously it's all been done in silence. Apart from them, we've had Anne Widdecombe throw down the gauntlet openly, publicly. She's took to the crease and made some extremely strong statements. It's on the front page of the Column website. If you've not seen it, look at her press conference there. It's blisteringly good. And but I think as a result of that, we've got Dominic Cummings and these rumblings coming out of Number 10 talking about they're going to have a defence review. Well, of course, this is alarm bells for everyone. So we're going to have to come out of the traps in 2020 and double down, because it's the defence reviews as to how they perpetrated and conducted the unification that they've pitched as cuts to allow defence union, to allow the room really for defence union, as we've redacted and contracted. And they've said hollowed out. Well, of course, that's not what it is. They've just annihilated our national force in order to allow room for the pan-EU defence union. So really, the pressure's got to go on Cummings and Boris as hard as possible, because the basis of that review, because obviously we've seen before, this is where the damage is done. This has got to be the basis for that review. Is that as a national force, or is that in defence union? Because you can't have both. As Anne said, you can't serve two masters. So that's point one. Secondly, we've already got an intimation from Admiral Tony Radakin, First Sea Lord, on Sunday when he was on Andrew Marr, talking about that there would potentially be more defence cuts. So he's already got advance warning that that's the direction they're going to go, because they want to make room within the cribbed budget, where they're including the pension funds and the pensions and whatnot in the defence budget to make it look bigger than it actually is, for accounting for cyber and what they're going to spend on cyber. So we've got the real serious issue now, of course, is the advance warning we got from Nick Whitney at RUSI on the impeachment of Trump, or the house training of Trump, relative to nuclear capability in Europe, and how that would affect, obviously, because the nuclear IP that Britain is using is American. The devices are American design. So the IP belongs to them. And this is very crucial that we've got this overlap timescale now, that von der Leyen wants to top out Defence Union 2020 next year, which will include single point command and control of military and civilian, officer training, game, set and match, everything. And of course, the only way that force is going to be credible, or as they say, genuine, is with nuclear capability. And the only way they can do that within the time frame they stated, that's their statements, is that they unify the existing nuclear capability that's in Europe. So that's Britain and France, or one or the other. So the fly in the ointment for them is really whether Trump stands up and goes, no, you're not having our nuclear IP go into this defence union. And this is obviously this scissoring perfectly in time, real time now, with the impeachment from Congress. So those are the big significant data points for everyone. So, there's a lot of work to be done in 2020, because really, while we've got the lid off it with Anne Widdecombe and Nigel Farage to an extent, but primarily Anne Widdecombe, is we've now got to get the debate within the Tory party. And it's very interesting that a couple of the former Tory party defence ministers that I've spoke to were really unaware of all the key the key stuff, the risks. They'd got the political pitch, which of course was a bent pitch, and they'd sort of accepted it verbatim without really looking at really what the other stuff was at the other end of the telescope. So that I think was very interesting for me, that they were, well, it's not a problem, it's all fine, we volunteered in, and they can't force us, without looking at really the cold reality of what was going on. Of course, it's going to be very, very crucial with the civilian instruments, with the things that are going on in Catalonia and France, and now, as Alex has said, with the farmers there in the lowlands. So this is, this is as much a concern for the civilian population that are going to have the EU intercede in civilian matters with a paramilitary force, and it's not going to be nice, and it's something that's going to have to be challenged very hard, very quickly.
Absolutely.
I've got a quick question, David, with regards to Brexit and the exit deal that the UK is going to present to the European Union. Is Defence Union an opt-in or an opt-out option on this deal? Because a lot of people had remarked that it was kind of baked into Theresa May's deal, and that Boris Johnson's deal is more or less the same as May's deal, just slightly varnished. But is Defence Union Britain, are they in or out? Is that an option for Boris Johnson on this deal? And would any political pressure make a difference on this issue?
Well, it's a great question. Thanks, Pat. Well, of course, this is the key thing. It's the elephant in the whole Brexit arena. It's Boris's Brexit paradox. We're supposed to be leaving, but we're going into defence union under the guise of security. Well, of course, the way they've woven the wording is, the wordsmithing is exquisite, because what they've done is they've opted in. Okay, and that's voluntary, and that's okay. And they're saying, well, we've got now I think William Prince is saying that we've got a narrow corridor to navigate out of if we choose. There's the if the government chooses to a path to freedom. Well, of course, they haven't chosen that. They've chosen to go in, not where they've said we're categorically coming out. So there's been a reluctance for any statements to be made, and certainly there's been nothing come as a result of Anne Widdecombe's open challenge to Boris Johnson to state what the case is. Because if he did state and did start to talk about it, it would open the Brexit Pandora's box. So the status, as far as I understand at the moment, Pat, is they've opted in, and they're trying to negotiate, a super duper deal, because at the end of it, obviously, there's a huge amount of defence contracts, which will be single point European defence contractor, and the EU will designate that contractor. So we're down to the semi-finals industrially between BAE and Rolls-Royce here and what's in Europe. because if they do that, and we end up with unification of those 5 or 6 big European companies into one, we don't have a defence industry anymore. We have a European defence industry. We don't have a national defence industry, and the military then is checkmated as a result. That's the key thing. And I've got to say that's what Anne Widdecombe grasped. And the previous Tory defence ministers I spoke to, when I articulated it to them in that fashion, it was, oh my God. The reaction was like, wow, because it was a piece of the jigsaw that they weren't aware of. It's crucial. But of course, without the MPs debating it, it'll carry on a set of rails in silence, because obviously this is all being driven as long-term strategic policy from the Cabinet Office. And there's the key problem. So whilst they're saying they're going to deal with civil servants and all the rest of it, well, are they?
Okay, well, let me ask Brian to comment on this then.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. What I just wanted to say is, on screen, I've got a Times article talking about Boris Johnson's intention to look at the way the Ministry of Defence spends billions of pounds. And the next line, of course, says that it's Dominic Cummings who is going to be brought in. And what's Dominic going to be looking at? He's going to be looking at procurement, because they're now saying that the procurement of British weapons systems and platforms is a disaster. We've got to look at procurement. What I think is going to happen here is this will be the stealth look at how UK procurement is matched up with the European system, which is defence union, which is exactly what David's talking about. So we can see that. Who is Dominic Cummings anyway to look at defence procurement? But that's the focus, procurement. And the other clue that I think we get at the moment that, well, I'll give some positive news. The Defence Union hasn't gone as well as it should, is we've now got the remarkable declaration that we're thinking of selling off the second aircraft carrier, the Prince of Wales. Now, we planned for these 2 carriers at the time they were planned. They would have known and also planned for the escorts to go with them. But of course, here we are with no escorts for the carriers, not enough escorts. And so we're talking about getting rid of a multi-billion pound warship. Why is this happening? Because as we predicted on UK column, the idea was that these new aircraft carriers were going to be run by the European military, and that is why they started to ramp up training with the French with regard to aircraft carriers. We've had the referendum, they've been caught with their pants down, now they've got to get rid of a carrier.
Yep. David, 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, I mean, that's a key data point there, because if they were going to review that particular nugget of the Royal Navy there, they would have advanced the money and built the ships, as Admiral Lord West has been calling for, and others as well. He's not on his own, there's many others. But they haven't. And there's the key data point, because what you've then got is this aircraft carrier that effectively, as it stands in its current packet, can't go to sea in anger. It can only go to sea in anger in a framework that will either be pan-European or pan-American. It can't go to sea as the Royal Navy because there isn't the capability to put it to sea in anger as the Royal Navy. It would be annihilated within a short space of time. So they're not daft. They're not going to do that. So, well, option one is, well, if we can't get you that way, we'll get you that way. Or, how do you want to do it? Do you want the aircraft carrier drill punched or bored? So it's the same scenario. So it's really the big sort of flag for everyone that's sort of, very easy to see, because they're going to have to sort of come clean at some stage. It'll either go into the European Defence Union or it'll go under some American coalition. Yeah. But the key thing is what we've been saying, and I said this to Sir Robert Fry, former Commandant General of the Royal Marines, when he was at Defence Committee. Well, you kept going, well, as a nation, this is wrong. Well, that's the whole point, is they're not doing it as a nation. It's been done on a pan-European basis.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, David. Okay, let's come on to Brian's choice for the year, which, of course, this whole process sort of hit the media with Jimmy Savile and so on, but it just continues to drive forward, Brian. This time with Epstein and Prince Andrew. But we don't seem to have anybody in prison yet.
No, we certainly don't. What do I want to say? First of all, I'm going to have to declare publicly I'm looking at my battery warning lights because I've committed the cardinal sin of failing to plug into power. So I hope you don't lose me. But we've just been talking military. My professional career was military. I never expected to start to be involved and interested in the subject of child abuse, but that's where life has taken me. And if we think back over recent years, more and more information coming out about the abuse of children by gangs, some Muslim gangs, but also, of course, accusations being made against establishment figures and politicians. And more and more people have come out of the woodwork. And where are we now? Well, now we've had Brexit, and everything to do with child abuse, with the exception of Prince Andrew, seems to have disappeared out of public reports. And I think this is very significant. I'm going to say I think that they've gone for Prince Andrew because this fits the media task of challenging everything to do with our establishment and constitution and structure as a nation state, go for the monarchy, whilst in the background we've seen everything around ICSA, the so-called Independent Child Abuse Inquiry, simply not reported. So why is all this happening, and why is it so critical? Because we know from what Conservative whips have said themselves, Tim Fortescue on record, on film with the BBC, saying when MPs came to us with problems such as little boys, we fixed it so they would do as we say. So my feeling is that we've had a rapid close down of anything to do with the child abuse. It's gone into the long grass, and this is to allow the control of the political and establishment to continue. And I think it's very significant that whilst there has been a little bit of mention of the possibility of blackmail with Prince Andrew and Epstein, we had mention of the fact that actually this was being partly controlled by Israel, but no real substance to the reports in the press. And of course, we've had this wonderfully how do we describe it, soft interview that was done with Prince Andrew. He didn't come out of it well. Well, of course he wouldn't, because he was being asked the questions he didn't want to answer. But was he treated differently from, say, the way an abuse victim would be treated by the media? Absolutely. He was sat down in soft lighting on warm room, wonderful carpets to try and get his story over to the public. I think there's a big cover-up going on. The cover-up is the scale of the abuse, but it's also the fact that children and the abuse of children are the means by which our politicians and political establishment are being blackmailed. I don't know whether anybody wants to come back on that.
Well, just before I get on the comment, Brian, I was just going to say you were having a little bit of fun with Emily Maitlis this morning, who, of course, was the BBC journalist who interviewed Prince Andrew.
Well, yes, of course, because I'd found out, there's another topic, but I found out that she was involved with an interview to do with vaccines where it might not have been her fault, but certainly the BBC didn't tell the truth that the vaccine support group and the spokeslady who they were interviewing didn't really point out they were being funded by the big pharma drug companies. So I tackled her on her Twitter page about that, Emily Maitland, but I also said, well, actually, you gave Andrew a very soft interview. You're criticising him for being still along Epstein, but if you deliberately give somebody a soft interview, aren't you actually helping the case yourself, or helping to make sure the truth doesn't come out? So I posted that up on her Twitter page. I'm pleased to see it's still there this morning. She hasn't blocked me yet. But I think we really need to take these people to task. And the other subject of children I think I need to mention as a key one for this year, of course, is sex education in schools for very young children. And in line with Patrick's, people starting to rise up. We've seen in Birmingham in particular, parents coming together to say, no, we're not going to have our very young children sexualized. So I think that has been very encouraging. What didn't the BBC report, of course? They didn't report that the parents, although they were predominantly Muslim in the initial stages of the protests, included Christians and indeed members of the Jewish community. BBC didn't report that. Why not? Because, of course, if you showed that communities were coming together to protest, that would be unacceptable to the BBC.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to move on to the last topic, which is mine, and the reason is because I want to get everybody's comments on whatever they wanted to comment on at the very end. We're running out of time here, but of course, for me, Patrick, the big topic of the year is the censorship agenda. We've all been subject to it. Now, we have a section on the UK Column website about this, and I just want to run through a couple of the key timeline items here, because this really began in 2014 with David Cameron speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, talking about regulation of the internet, concerned about extremism on the internet, and expressing his definition of extremism to include people that are skeptical about September the 11th, people that are skeptical about 7/7 and a whole bunch of other things. But really it started to ramp up beginning in 2017 when Amber Rudd, who was the Home Secretary at the time, had a meeting with the tech companies, the big tech companies, and we've got to reinforce that this policy, this censorship policy, is being driven from the UK, or at least the UK was the first to start really driving this forward with David Cameron's speech, and you could see the policy building over the next couple of years, but 2017 is when it really kicked off. The tech companies responded with an open letter, really agreeing with their position. This went to MPs. They asked Facebook to tackle the fake news, and we started hearing the term fake news being used much more commonly. Then we had other things building. Theresa May saying, crucially, our campaign will also include exploring creating legal liability for tech companies if they fail to take action. So the threats alongside this sort of, we've got the carrot and the stick. So they've had meetings with the tech companies, but at the same time, they're threatening the tech companies. And then the tech giants announced the formation of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. Now, the tech companies' response to what the British government was saying was being labelled as countering terrorism, but of course they were including any kind of what they viewed as extremism, not necessarily just terrorism. And Patrick, what we've seen over the last couple of years, in fact, is that terrorist content from ISIS and from al-Nusra and others in Syria and other places, that seems to get free rein on the social media networks, even today. But people commenting on what ISIS and al-Nusra are doing in Syria, they're being censored. So let's move on to the next one then. World Socialist website publishes data on the effect of Google algorithm change. We have all been subject to this, where we've effectively been removed from the organic search on Google. And of course, Google is still the biggest search engine on the planet. What's next? Google and George Soros backing fact checkers. So we start seeing the fact checkers making an appearance. Then we move on to the Trust Project and the issue, the idea that of media companies requiring to build trust, and only if they're trusted do they then get promoted on social media, or they certainly don't, rather than promoted, certainly don't get censored so much on social media. So trust is one of the angles that's being presented. And then Theresa May announces the global internet, or at least British internet regulation at Davos. And this internet regulation, this policy of internet regulation is taken up by the French, it's taken up in the United States and other countries. And we have the British government saying that really they're particularly concerned about mainstream media, that it's not commercially viable. It may need some government support in some way. And then Theresa May establishes a rapid response unit within the Cabinet Office, and this is running analytics on social media to identify the people that are pushing out what they describe as disinformation. In parallel with that, Theresa May announces the rapid response mechanism. These are not to be confused, because the rapid response mechanism is all about making sure that there's a common narrative amongst all the sort of Western G7 countries. So when there's an allegation of chemical poisoning of so the Skripals, for example, that is agreed right across the board of the G7 countries. There can be no dispute that that's what happened. And then as we move forward, the government published the online harms white paper, which really is going to have a chilling effect. The legislation that comes out of that is going to have a chilling effect on free speech. Then yesterday, of course, we had the state opening of Parliament once again, and the Queen announcing that the online harms bill is going to be brought forward in this parliamentary section. She announced a treason bill because apparently the Treason Act of 1315 is really too archaic. People can't understand it. They need to bring it up to date. They're going to announce, they have announced an official secrets bill, and they have announced a register of foreign agents. What's very interesting is that the official secrets bill, they feel that they need to update the Official Secrets Act because it doesn't cover agents of influence, including people that are paid secretly by foreign powers, or people that are spreading conspiracy theories or extreme views with the purpose of creating strains in society. This is how it's being pushed forward. As for the Treason Act, unintelligible is how they describe it. It's too old. It needs to be rewritten to deal with modern threats posed by jihadists, apparently. But this all, Patrick, is going to have a pretty chilling effect on free speech if you take it as a whole. We can see the direction of travel. 2020 and the 2020s are going to become, as Alex said earlier, increasingly difficult for independent media.
Yeah, I think that what they've done, what you've clearly shown here, is they've used the 2016 election in the United States, this idea or this conspiracy theory that the Russians helped to elect Donald Trump. This is still a prevalent mainstream pushed conspiracy theory, and they've used that to sort of mobilize the Silicon Valley tech giants to regulate speech online, to protect people from what is effectively a phantom menace. When all the while, what you have is it is the lies, the fake news that is constantly being produced and circulated by mainstream media or trusted news outlets. They're creating fake stories. There's tons of them. We've shown them on this show. Other people have chronicled these online. That's actually driving people away from mainstream media. This is why their business model is not viable, why they're complaining about this. It's driving people to alternative media, to social media, and the only way that the establishment sees to deal with this mass migration, this exodus, is to increase regulation of social media, to clamp down on anybody that's supposedly helping a foreign government. Well, if you're exposing something like the OPCW leaks, whereby the U.S., specifically the U.S., is absolutely indictable in these leaks, if that somehow helps the Russians to expose the truth, it's a zero-sum game mentality now, where anything that hurts Britain or hurts the reputation of the U.S., which isn't difficult to do, by the way, historically, but that's somehow helping a foreign government, i.e. the Russians. Therefore, it's against the law. It's a crime. This is going to be
holding government, your national government to account becomes a crime because you're helping a foreign government.
Yeah. So exactly, wanting transparency with your own government, wanting to stamp out corruption in your own backyard, this becomes a crime. This is a very slippery slope, and it's going to be applied, like all of these measures, very arbitrarily, not evenly, and not according to any real methodology. It's just going to be if they feel like targeting you or not and coming down with a hammer on you. That's it. So very dark trend in many people's opinion.
Okay. Well, look, guys, we're completely out of time. So 30 seconds each, please, to close. Just Alex, let me start with you. Yeah, give me your thoughts.
So I'm just affirming my contention. It's all the battle for the jurisdiction issues in the 2020s is what matters. The judiciary is the problem. It's completely riddled with child abusers to the very top in all Western jurisdictions. It's the judiciary to whom these allegations of breaching the Official Secrets Act will be taken by the deep state. It's in the judging of allegations that we have to retain common law, even if common law is codified in the coming decade, so that we don't end up with juristocracy, rule by judges, which the continent has. Other parts of the world are actually trying to move away from that towards the common law. Our deep state is trying to foist civil law on other peoples and even our own peoples now, because it allows the high and mighty to get away with deep statery, lying and child abuse and theft of property and persons. So it is in the judging of offences and allegations of offences that we really have to take our own responsibility and educate people in the next decade.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Alex. David Ellis.
Yeah, very well said, Pat. I think you summed that up perfectly. It's a shutting down of free speech and the challenging and the scrutiny and people's freedoms all over. And what you're going to see is people are just going to be deplatformed and then potentially criminalised and put through some dreadful court process just because they've had the nerve to try and hold government or departments or whoever to account. So it's pretty dreadful. Really dreadful, and everybody's got to do a little bit, otherwise this will happen rapidly. So, we've all got to kind of, whoever your God is, may it go with you.
Indeed. And Brian, finally.
Well, certainly concur those last remarks. I thought that those bullet points of what the Queen was saying, very, very dangerous indeed. I think they're going to use online harm as the excuse to go against free media online. Treason, I think what they're going to do is turn treason round. So if you attempt to correct what your government is doing that's wrong, you will be guilty of the treason. And this, I think, is happening. They're trying to do this because, of course, many people have been saying point blank over the last year in particular that politicians have committed treason in selling out the country. And the Official Secrets Act, that's a very interesting one. I think that's going to partly be used to close down whistleblowers from speaking out about what's really happening in the military. But to end on a positive note, can I say thank you to everybody who supported the UK column. And I also want to say, if you're asking us, what can you do? It's speak out. It doesn't matter where you are, talking to individuals in the street, Twitter, emails, wherever you get a chance, tell people what's happening and warn them. And also spread our material. We are now being censored. There's no question of that. Spread our material, and you're helping the process. But most of all, thank you for your support.
Yes, indeed. And I'd like to echo that as well. I'd also like to say thank you very much to Patrick Henningsen as well, because, of course, you've taken more of a role here in this year. And, of course, 21st Century Wire needs your support as well as the way UK column. So please consider that as well. Now, just want to end. Yesterday, I had the privilege to speak to Bill Binney for the second time. Of course, former NSA whistleblower, quite timely because he, of course, has been highlighting a lot of the shenanigans around Russiagate and so on. Trump's the problems that he was suffering yesterday, very timely. I'm hoping to have the final edit of that out to the public. At the moment, it's just available to members on the UK Column community website. I'm hoping to have the final edit of that out either later tonight or tomorrow. Look out for it. It's an interesting discussion. Okay, that's it for this year. Thank you very much once again to everybody that's joined us. We will be back on Monday, the 6th of January. I hope everybody has a great Christmas and New Year, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.